The house had never been quiet, not in the way some people expect quiet to mean silence. It was a family house, lived in fully, with scraped knees at the door, bikes leaning against the fence, and the sound of children existing without apology. Laughter drifted through the open windows most afternoons. A ball bounced against the wooden fence. Feet ran across grass worn thin by years of play. To us, that sound meant safety. It meant home. We had moved into the neighborhood believing we had found a rare thing. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, neighbors who waved without needing a reason. It was the kind of place where people talked about community pride and shared holiday decorations. At least, that was the image presented on the surface. The yard was modest but open. No HOA rules against play structures, no posted quiet hours during the day, nothing that suggested children were expected to vanish indoors the moment they made noise. Our kids played after school and on weekends the way kids always had: tag, chalk drawings on the driveway, a small plastic soccer goal that tipped over more than it stood straight. The first sign of trouble came quietly, not with a confrontation or a raised voice. It came with a look. From her front porch across the street, she watched. Always watching. Arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Her eyes followed every movement, every laugh, every moment of joy that spilled past our fence line. At first, we told ourselves it was nothing. Some people just observed. Some people had nothing better to do. Then came the note. It was placed carefully in the mailbox, folded once, written in neat, aggressive handwriting. It mentioned noise. Excessive noise, disruptive behavior. It reminded us that this was a residential neighborhood. It suggested that consideration was owed. There was no name signed, but we knew. We talked about it that night after the kids were asleep. We reread the note under the kitchen light. It felt ridiculous. The noise happened in the afternoon. The kids were never outside early in the morning or late at night. There were no parties, no shouting matches, no music blasting from speakers. We decided to ignore it. Responding felt like inviting a fight that did not need to happen. The next afternoon, the kids were outside again. The weather was perfect. Sunlight filtered through the trees. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass. They were laughing, louder than usual, because laughter always gets louder when no one is telling you to stop. That was when the police car pulled up. At first, we thought it was passing through. Then it slowed. Then it stopped. The officer stepped out calmly, hand resting near his belt, posture neutral. He walked toward the yard while the kids froze, confused, unsure if they were suddenly in trouble for being kids. A noise complaint, he said. A neighbor had called. We stood there stunned. The officer looked just as confused as we felt. He glanced around. No broken rules, no ordinance violations, just kids playing. He explained that he had to respond because a call had been made. He apologized for the interruption. He told the kids they were doing nothing wrong. He left. The kids asked if they were in trouble. We told them no, but something had shifted. The yard felt different. Watched, smaller. We hoped that would be the end of it. It was not. 2 days later, it happened again. This time the call came earlier in the day, barely past noon. The kids were outside because school was out for a teacher, planning day. They were running a water sprinkler, squealing as cold water hit warm skin. The sound carried, yes, but so did joy. The police car returned. This time the officer was different, younger, more stiff. He asked questions. He wrote notes. He explained that repeated calls created a record. Even if no laws were being broken, the complaints were being logged. That word stuck, record. We asked who had called. He did not say her name, but he did not need to. He gestured vaguely toward the street, toward the house with the drawn curtains and the porch that had become a watchtower. After he left, the kids went inside without being told. They sat quietly, confused, stripped of something they did not know they could lose. That night, the anger set in. Not loud anger, not shouting anger, the kind that sits heavy in the chest and makes everything feel unfair. We followed the rules. We paid our taxes. We respected the neighborhood. And yet, Someone had decided that her comfort mattered more than our children's right to exist. We checked local ordinances. We read city codes. We confirmed what we already knew. There were no noise restrictions during those hours. Children playing was not a violation. Calling the police was not illegal, but abusing emergency services was frowned upon. Still, the damage was done. The next few days, the yard stayed quiet, not because it had to be, because it felt safer that way. The kids played inside. Screens replaced sunlight. Laughter softened into whispers. Across the street, the watching continued. Neighbors began to notice. Not the noise. The police cars. People talked. Not to us at first, just among themselves. Curious glances. Subtle questions. Why were the cops here again? What was going on? The narrative started to form, but it was incomplete. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a neighbor from 2 houses down stopped by. She had lived there for years. She had watched our kids grow since the day we moved in. She asked if everything was okay. We told her. Her face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. She nodded slowly and said something that shifted everything. She said this was not the first time. She explained that the woman across the street had a history. Complaints about dogs barking. Complaints about delivery. Trucks. Complaints about kids riding bikes too close to her driveway. Most people brushed it off. But no one had pushed back. No one had wanted trouble, until now. By the end of the week, more neighbors had heard. More people had noticed the pattern. The police calls, the tension. The quiet yard that used to be full of life. The neighborhood began to take sides, and the woman across the street did not yet realize that calling the cops twice had done more than create a record. It had started one. A different kind. One that would not stay quiet for long. The neighborhood had its own rhythm, one that usually moved slowly and politely. People waved, lawns were trimmed on Saturdays. Trash cans appeared and disappeared like clockwork. Conflict, when it existed at all, stayed quiet and indirect. But once the police cars had been seen twice on the same street in a single week, that rhythm broke. It started with glances. Neighbors who used to wave without stopping now paused a little longer. Their eyes moved from the house to the yard, then across the street. Conversations that once stayed shallow began to carry weight. Questions were asked in lowered voices. Curiosity spread, and curiosity never stays neutral for long. At first, the assumptions were not in our favor. That was the natural direction things tend to go. People imagine loud music, uncontrolled kids, parents who do not care. It was easier to believe that story than to imagine someone calling the police on children for simply playing. But assumptions have a short lifespan when reality refuses to match them. The yard stayed quiet for days. No shouting, no games, no sound beyond the normal hum of life. Cars passing, birds in the trees, a lawnmower 2 streets over. And still, the watching continued. She stood at her window now, not even pretending to be casual about it. Curtains, pulled back just enough to see through. Her presence felt heavier than the noise ever had, a pressure that sat on the house, pressing inward. The kids noticed it too. They asked why they could not play outside anymore. They asked if they had done something wrong. They asked why the police came, questions that had no satisfying answers. Explaining adult pettiness to children is like trying to explain weather to someone who has never seen rain. It does not make sense, and it should not have to. We told them they had done nothing wrong, and that made the situation worse because it meant there was nothing they could fix. One afternoon, a group of neighbors gathered near the mailbox cluster at the corner. It was not planned. It just happened. Someone mentioned the police. Someone else mentioned the calls. Another neighbor filled in the gaps. The story began to change shape. It was not loud kids. It was repeated complaints. It was a pattern. It was one person. People began to remember things they had ignored before. The time she yelled at a delivery driver for parking too close to her driveway. The note left on a windshield about a car being an inch over the property line. The argument over holiday lights being too bright, each memory added weight. Each one shifted blame away from us and toward her. By the end of the week, the neighborhood understood something important. The police had not been responding to a problem. They had been responding to her. That realization did not sit well with people. Parents were the first to react. Quiet anger spread among them, the kind that feels personal. They imagined their own kids in that yard. They imagined police cars pulling up because of laughter. They imagined fear replacing joy. No one liked that image. Then came the third call. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The kids were outside again, cautiously this time. No running, no shouting. Just chalk on the driveway. Soft voices. Controlled. Movements, like they were guests in their own home. The police car arrived anyway. This time the officer was visibly irritated. Not at us, at the situation. He listened, he looked around, he sighed. He explained again that no laws were being broken. He noted that repeated unfounded calls could lead to consequences. Consequences. That word traveled fast. Neighbors saw the police car pull away and stepped outside. They did not need to ask what had happened. They already knew. Phones came out. Messages were sent. The informal neighborhood network lit up. By evening, the story had spread far beyond our street. People were angry now. Not confused, not curious, angry. The issue was no longer noise. It was control. She had tried to use authority to enforce her personal comfort. She had tried to turn law enforcement into a tool for silencing children, and she had done it in a place that valued appearances over confrontation, counting on everyone else to stay quiet. That was her mistake. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for later that week. Attendance was usually low. A handful of retirees, one or two board members who took turns pretending to care. This time, the room filled. Parents came. Homeowners who never showed up before came. People stood along the walls. Chairs were pulled. From other rooms. The air felt tight, charged. Her seat sat empty at first. The meeting started with routine items. Budgets, landscaping, maintenance. People waited. No one interrupted. But the silence felt intentional, like everyone was holding the same thought. Then the floor opened for general concerns. Someone spoke up. They mentioned police calls. They mentioned children being targeted. They mentioned the misuse of emergency services. Heads turned. Nods followed. Stories spilled out, one after another. Calm but firm. No shouting, no insults, just facts layered on facts. By the time she arrived, late and flustered, the narrative was no longer hers to control. She sat down stiffly, eyes darting around the room. The attention was immediate and unmistakable. She tried to look offended. She tried to look wronged. But the room did not reflect that energy back to her. It reflected something else. Disapproval. The board listened. Notes were taken. Questions were asked. For the first time, the pattern was documented not by police logs, but by neighbors who were done staying quiet. When the meeting ended, nothing official had changed yet. No votes, no resolutions. But something far more important had shifted. She no longer had anonymity. She no longer had silence working in her favor. As people filed out, they did not avoid her. They did not whisper behind her back. They looked at her directly. Some shook their heads. Some said nothing at all. That night, the kids played outside again, not loudly, not defiantly, just freely. Across the street, the curtains stayed closed, for now. Silence has weight when it changes shape. Before, it had been protective, wrapping itself around one house and keeping its actions hidden. After the meeting, that silence became something else entirely. It became distance, and distance, in a Beers neighborhood built on appearances, is its own kind of judgment. The days following the HOA meeting felt different in subtle ways. Not dramatic, not loud, but unmistakable. People still waved, but not at everyone. Conversations still happened, but not in every direction. Invitations traveled selectively. Information flowed around one house instead of through it, she noticed. She stood outside more often now, arms crossed tighter than before, chin raised like a challenge. Her presence felt less like authority and more like defiance. She wanted to be seen. She wanted someone to react. No one did. The kids returned to the yard fully by midweek. The soccer goal came back out. The chalk spread across the driveway again. Laughter returned, uneven at first, then natural. Each sound felt like a small reclaiming. No police cars came. That absence mattered. Neighbors began to stop by again. Not in groups, one at a time, casual. Conversations that lingered a little longer than usual. They asked how the kids were doing. They shared their own stories, ones they had kept quiet for years. A dog complaint that ended in a warning. A threat. To call the city over a trash can left out too long. In confrontation over where someone parked during a party, a pattern finally spoken out loud. What had once felt like isolated incidents now looked coordinated. A single source, a single motive, control disguised as concern. The HOA board began, making quiet moves, not public announcements, not letters yet. They reviewed complaint histories, they compared dates. They looked at the frequency of calls made from one address. The picture was not flattering. In the meantime, she tried a different tactic. If the police no longer worked, social pressure might. She started talking to neighbors directly. Stopping. People mid-walk. Offering her version of events unprompted. Framing herself as the reasonable one. The concerned homeowner. The person just trying to maintain peace. It did not land. People listened politely. Then disengaged. No agreement. No reassurance. Just nods and quick exits. The stories she told did not match what everyone had seen with their own eyes, and she could feel it slipping. One afternoon, she crossed the street and stood at the edge of the yard, not stepping onto the property but close enough to make the point clear. Her posture was rigid. Her voice carried that familiar sharpness, even without words being exchanged. The kids froze again. That moment drew attention. Curtains shifted, doors opened. A neighbor walking his dog slowed and watched. Another neighbor stepped out onto her. Porch, arms folded. She stood there longer than necessary, then turned and walked away. The message had been sent and received, just not the way she intended. That evening, messages circulated again. Not gossip, warnings, people telling each other to document interactions, to record dates and times, to stop brushing things off. She had underestimated one thing. Parents talk. They compare notes. They share screenshots. They build timelines. And once they do not unsee patterns. By the end of the week, a formal complaint was drafted, not by us alone, by multiple homeowners. It outlined harassment, abuse of emergency services, intimidation, a repeated pattern of behavior designed to control others through fear of authority. It was submitted to the HOA and copied to the city. That step changed everything, because now there was a file. Not just police logs responding to calls, but a documented history of misuse. Context, corroboration. The city responded first, not with action, with questions. They asked for clarification, for dates, for witnesses, for specifics. They asked whether mediation had been attempted, whether warnings had been issued. The HOA responded carefully, aware that their own handling of the situation would now be examined. She received a letter. It was not dramatic. It was not accusatory. It was worse. It was neutral. It informed her that complaints had been filed regarding her behavior, that the board was reviewing the matter, that further actions could be taken if patterns continued. That letter broke something. The following days were tense. She avoided people entirely now. Curtains closed at all hours, car pulling in and out of the garage without pause. No porch watching, no confrontations. The quiet returned. But it was not the same quiet as before. It felt fragile. The kids sensed it too. They played freely again, but with an awareness that had not existed before. They knew now that joy could be interrupted. That safety was not guaranteed, just because you were doing nothing wrong. That knowledge lingered. Then came the unexpected visit. 2 city representatives arrived mid-morning. Not police, code enforcement. They walked the street slowly, clipboards in hand. They took photos. They asked general questions of neighbors who happened to be outside. They knocked on her door. She did not answer at first. They waited. When she finally opened the door, the conversation was not visible, but the body language was. Defensive, rigid, unhappy. They stayed longer than expected. By the time they left, the street felt like it was holding its breath. Nothing happened immediately after that. No tickets. No notices posted publicly. But the balance had shifted again. She was no longer the one initiating action. She was reacting. Desperation rarely arrives loudly. It creeps in through small decisions, rushed thoughts, and the need to regain control when control has already slipped away. After the visit from code enforcement, the balance of the neighborhood changed in ways that could not be undone. She felt it first. The absence of power is loud to the person who once held it. Doors closed faster now. Conversations ended when she approached. Neighbors who once nodded politely suddenly found reasons to look at their phones or cross the street. The same people who had avoided conflict were no longer afraid of it. They were simply done. Her house became still in a way that felt unnatural. No porch watching, no lingering at the window, curtains drawn tight even during the day. The yard immaculate but unused, like a showroom no one wanted to visit. The kids noticed the shift before we did. They played freely again, louder this time, not out of defiance but relief. The yard reclaimed its role as a place of movement and sound. Balls bounced, laughter carried. The fear that had settled into their shoulders slowly eased, and still no police came. That silence frustrated her more than any confrontation ever could. When authority stops responding the way you expect, the instinct is to escalate. To force. A reaction. To regain leverage, she had relied on systems that assumed good faith. Once that assumption cracked, she needed something new. She chose accusation. It began with a neighborhood message board post, carefully worded. Vague enough to avoid naming anyone, but specific enough to point fingers. She claimed ongoing disturbances, property damage, harassment. She framed herself as the target of an aggressive household that had turned the neighborhood against her. Within minutes, responses appeared, not the ones she expected. People asked questions, calm ones, requests for dates, evidence, clarification. Screenshots were posted in reply, records referenced. Someone mentioned the police calls. Someone else mentioned the HOA meeting. Another neighbor gently pointed out that accusations without proof were not helpful. The post lost momentum fast. She deleted it within the hour. That night, something else appeared, a complaint filed with the city, this time alleging code violations on our property. Fence height, noise, improper use of yard space. Every item was either inaccurate or outright false. But the goal was not accuracy, it was disruption. The city responded. Again, an inspection was scheduled. This time, we were ready. Documents printed. Ordinances highlighted, measurements taken in advance. The inspection itself was almost anticlimactic. The officer walked the property, nodded, checked boxes, and left. No violations. That result was shared with the HOA. Quietly. Officially, she was informed. That was the moment desperation crossed into recklessness. 2 days later, she confronted a neighbor directly. Not us. Someone else. A woman who had spoken at the meeting. Voices were raised, accusations thrown. The argument spilled onto the sidewalk. Multiple people witnessed it. Phones came out. The narrative shifted again. What had once been whispers became certainty. This was no longer about noise, or kids, or rules. It was about behavior. The HOA board could not ignore it now, even if they wanted to. An emergency meeting was called. Attendance was higher than ever. The tone was different too, less cautious, less polite. The board outlined the complaints received, the documented pattern, the misuse of city resources, the confrontations. They did not name her at first. They did not have to. When they opened the floor, people spoke clearly and without hesitation. Not emotionally, not angrily, just honestly. They described interactions, they described fear, they described feeling targeted in their own homes, Then she stood. Her voice shook at first, not with fear, with rage. She denied everything. She accused the board of bias. She accused neighbors of collusion. She claimed she was being bullied. The room did not respond. That silence was louder than shouting. The board chair explained the next steps. A formal warning, a behavior review, potential fines, mandatory mediation, continued monitoring. She laughed. A sharp sound that did not land. She said they could not do that. That she knew her rights, that she would take action. No one reacted. That was the moment she realized something important. Threats only work when people are afraid. She left early. The following week, changes appeared around her property. Cameras installed, signs posted, notices taped inside windows. Everything communicated vigilance. Everything screamed control. But control does not return once trust is gone. Neighbors avoided her entirely now. Kids were told to walk on the other side of the street. Conversations stopped when she appeared. Invitations did not include her. She became isolated inside a neighborhood that had once tolerated her. Isolation sharpens desperation. One evening, well after dark, a police car drove slowly past the house. Not responding to a call, just passing through. Routine patrol. She stepped outside and began gesturing, pointing, talking rapidly. The officer did not stop. That moment broke her composure. The next morning, another city complaint was filed. This time, anonymous, this time serious. Allegations that carried consequences if proven. The city took it seriously. Investigators were assigned, interviews scheduled. What she did not realize was that false reports leave trails. Digital ones. Time. Stamps, IP addresses, patterns. And those patterns were already familiar to the city.
Systems are slow by design. They move carefully, deliberately, and without emotion. That slowness often protects people who misuse them, at least for a while. But when patterns become clear, speed is no longer necessary. Accuracy is. The investigators did not arrive with lights or urgency. They arrived with folders. Interviews began quietly. One neighbor at a time. Short conversations. Simple questions. Dates. Times. Repeated behaviors. Each answer fit neatly into a growing framework that already existed before the first door was knocked. The city had seen this before. False reports are rarely isolated. They cluster, they repeat, they follow habits, the same address, the same tone. The same complaints repackaged with new details. And this time, there was something different. Corroboration. Neighbors provided documentation. Screenshots of posts, copies of HOA letters, notes from meetings, logs of police visits. Everything that once felt informal now became evidence. She, meanwhile, felt the pressure closing in. Her house remained sealed. Cameras multiplied. Signs warned of trespassing and recording. Her presence in the neighborhood reduced to brief. Rigid movements from car to door and back again, but isolation does not stop fear. It amplifies it. She began contacting the HOA board directly. Emails at odd hours. Long messages filled with accusations, demands, and threats of legal action. Each one was forwarded, archived, and added to the file. The board stopped responding. That silence was procedural, not personal, though she took it personally. When the city scheduled a formal interview with her, she postponed it, then postponed it again. She demanded representation. She accused the city of harassment. She tried to reframe herself as the victim of a coordinated campaign. The investigators noted it all. Delay is a tactic. It rarely works. While she stalled, the neighborhood healed in small, quiet ways. Kids played freely again. Parents lingered outside in the evenings. The yard felt open again, not watched. Laughter returned without hesitation. It was not loud defiance. It was normal life resuming, and that normalcy made her absence more obvious. When the interview finally happened, it did not go the way she expected. She arrived defensive, armed with printed notes, prepared speeches. Claims of discrimination and targeting. She spoke at length, often interrupting. circling back to grievances that had nothing to do with the questions being asked. The investigators listened. They asked for evidence. She had none. They asked for witnesses. She named no one. They asked about the repeated calls, the timing, the content. The escalation, her answers contradicted each other. That mattered. After the interview, a notice was issued. Not public, not dramatic. A formal warning regarding misuse of municipal resources. A reminder of penalties for false reporting. A clear statement that continued behavior could result in fines or legal action. It was the first official consequence she could not dismiss. The HOA followed with their own, a fine. Modest but symbolic. Mandatory mediation sessions. Probationary period with clear expectations. She refused mediation. That refusal triggered the next step. Privileges suspended. Voting rights paused. Access to certain HOA services restricted. It was not punishment. It was process. But to her, it was humiliation. She reacted the only way she knew how. She went loud. A lawyer letter appeared in mailboxes, not just ours. Several neighbors received copies. It accused the HOA of discrimination. It accused residents of harassment. It threatened legal action. The letter was poorly written, vague, overreaching. The HOA's response was short and precise. They welcomed formal legal review that ended that. What she did not understand was that the community had already moved past fear. The letter did not scare anyone. It confirmed what they already believed, that her behavior had always relied on. Intimidation, and intimidation only works in silence. The final blow came quietly. One afternoon, a city notice was posted on her door. Official, dated, referencing case numbers she recognized. She had been fined for repeated false reports. Not once, not twice. Cumulative penalty, enough to sting, enough to matter. The notice outlined next steps, options for appeal, consequences for further violations. For the first time, the power dynamic fully reversed. She was no longer calling systems. They were watching her that night. The street was calm, not tense, peaceful. The kind of calm that comes after resolution, not suppression. Lights glowed softly through windows. Kids rode bikes until sunset. Neighbors talked in driveways again. Across the street, her house stayed dark. After consequences arrive, there is always a quiet period that follows. Not the uneasy quiet that comes from fear or restraint, but the steady quiet of something finally being resolved. The neighborhood entered that phase slowly, almost cautiously, as if it did not quite trust that the tension was really gone. But day by day, it became clear that it was her house changed first. The signs disappeared. Cameras came down one by one. Curtains opened again, not fully, but enough to let light back in. The driveway no longer snapped shut the moment her car pulled in. These were small details, but neighborhoods are built on noticing small things. She stopped filing complaints. Not about the yard. Not about noise. Not about anything. The systems she had leaned on were no longer tools she could control. Every call would now be scrutinized. Every report would carry weight in the wrong direction. She knew it, and that knowledge forced restraint where there had never been any before. The kids felt the difference before the adults did. They played without hesitation now. Loud when they wanted to be loud. Quiet when they wanted to be quiet. Not because anyone told them to, but because that is how childhood naturally moves. The yard returned to what it had always been meant to be. A place of movement. A place of noise. A place of life. No one flinched when a car slowed down anymore. No one checked windows when laughter rose. Normal returned. Neighbors grew closer in ways that surprised even them. The shared experience had changed something fundamental. People who once lived side by side without truly knowing each other now exchanged numbers, watched each other's houses, and spoke openly. They had learned that silence benefits the wrong people. The HOA adjusted to. New procedures were put in place. Complaint reviews required corroboration. Repeated unfounded reports triggered review automatically. The board documented everything now, not out of suspicion, but out of responsibility. They had learned the cost of ignoring patterns. As for her, She did not apologize. She did not admit fault. She did not need to. Her absence from the center of things spoke louder than any statement ever could. She became just another resident again, stripped of the attention and authority she had once tried to manufacture. And that was the real. Consequence control was never about rules or noise or kids. It was about being the center, the enforcer, the person who could bend a neighborhood to her comfort. Once that was gone, there was nothing left to fight with. Occasionally, paths crossed. A brief nod, a stiff acknowledgement. No words exchanged. No confrontations. Just coexistence. That was enough. The kids grew older. Seasons changed. New families moved in. The story faded into memory, retold sometimes in quiet conversations as a reminder rather than a warning. Remember when the cops kept showing up for no reason? Remember how that turned out? It became part of the neighborhood's identity. Not as gossip, but as a lesson. That community only works when people protect it together. That authority should never be used as a weapon. That speaking up matters. Most of all, it reminded everyone of something simple. Children playing is not a problem. Joy is not a disturbance. And calling the police does not make someone right years later. When new kids ran through the same yard, laughing just as loudly, no one watched from behind curtains anymore. No one counted minutes or measured sound. They just let it be what it was always meant to be. A neighborhood. And that was the ending she never expected.